Imagine living in a world where a single word could strip you of your dignity, erase your legal status, and condemn you to a fate worse than death. Among the Norse, that word was arger, a term so poisonous, so drenched in contempt, that being labeled with it could destroy your life completely. In Viking society, manhood wasn't just expected, it was the foundation of your worth. It defined your legal identity, your standing in the community, even your spiritual integrity. To be called arger, loosely translated as unmanly, effeminate, or morally deviant, was far more than a personal insult. It was a formal accusation with real consequences, especially under Icelandic law codes like the Gragas. This single word implied traits that violated everything the Norse valued in a man: cowardice, passive behavior in same sex relations, or the practice of seida, a type of sorcery typically associated with women and considered deeply shameful for men. Even Odin himself, according to Snorri Sturluson in the Ynglinga saga, wasn't immune to this judgment. His use of seida was condemned as so disgraceful that no man could engage in it without losing his honor. If you're intrigued by how a society could weaponize identity and words with such brutal precision, go ahead and hit that like button. And consider subscribing for more stories like this one. Being called arger was what the Norse called a nid, a legally recognized slur that demanded a response. And that response was violent. The accused was expected to challenge the accuser to a ritual duel known as holmgang. Refusing to fight was seen as an admission of guilt, and the punishment that followed was absolute. In 10th and 11th century Iceland, failing to defend against this accusation could result in full outlawry, one of the most severe penalties in Viking law. Outlawry wasn't just exile, it was a complete erasure of personhood. A man found guilty would be stripped of all legal protections and declared fair game. Anyone could kill him without consequences. The stain didn't stop with the individual either. It could taint an entire family line. Kin would often abandon an accused ergi man out of fear that the dishonor would spread to them, like a spiritual contagion. Such men were viewed as corrupted, not just in reputation, but in soul. They were seen as unfit to live among warriors, unworthy of even the most basic human respect. To be arger wasn't just disgraceful, it was annihilation. In the harsh lexicon of Viking justice, few sentences were more final than Skogganger, which literally means going into the forest. But this wasn't some poetic exile into nature. It was a cold, calculated death sentence by way of abandonment. A man sentenced to Skogganger was erased from society. He lost his rights, his kinship, and any hope of shelter. Left to survive alone in the wild, he became an utlagr, an outlaw permanently severed from the human world. The Gragas outlines two levels of outlawry: Fjorbaugskade, or lesser outlawry, which lasted 3 years and allowed for the possibility of return, and Skogganger, which offered no such redemption. Under the latter, the condemned was forced to leave all inhabited areas, forbidden from receiving help or even sharing a fire with anyone. He couldn't seek food, shelter, or trade. He was denied entry into homes, temples, and legal assemblies. If he was seen near any settlement, anyone could kill him, and no law would punish them for it. His name became a curse, his body unprotected, his very existence erased from the world of the living. He was barred from festivals, forbidden to make sacrifices, and excluded from the sacred rituals of his people. He was now a nidinga, a man stripped of drengskapa, the sacred code of Norse honor and masculinity. The sagas preserve chilling echoes of this punishment. In Grettir's saga, the outlaw Grettir Asmundarson is condemned to years of solitude, clinging to life in the desolate wild. Slowly, his body weakens, his mind fractures, his spirit fades. This was the final outcome for those who couldn't or wouldn't defend their honor. Not just death, but disintegration. Alone, forgotten, and erased. Very few survived long in such a state. The Norse landscape was brutal. Dense forests, punishing winters, wild beasts, but more terrifying than the cold or the hunger was the silence. No rites would be performed, no mourning songs would be sung. For a man cast out as aggr, death came not with a wound, but with erasure. He was considered dead long before his body gave out. To the Vikings, masculinity was sacred. It meant strength, honor, the willingness to fight when needed. So what became of those who were deemed unmanly? The answer was merciless. They were declared outlaws, stripped of humanity, and made into something less than men, something to be hunted. These men were branded utlager, outside the law. Not imprisoned, not forgiven, not reformed. They were left exposed and legally unprotected, their lives reduced to open targets. But the horror lay not just in the law itself, it was in the ritual humiliation, the cold and deliberate unmaking of a man. A so-called unmanly man had no right to home, kin, or legacy. He was spoken of as a wolf in the forest, a beast, nameless and defenseless. Killing him wasn't a crime. It was considered a duty. The law didn't just allow it. In some cases, it rewarded it. The killer could take the outlaw's property without penalty. The legal code said it plainly. He who kills an outlaw shall not pay weregild. And yet, for the man labelled aggr, the legal consequences were only part of the punishment. The moral weight was worse. His supposed deviance, whether from sorcery, sexual roles outside the masculine norm, or any behavior that challenged gender boundaries, was seen as corrupting. It was not enough to remove him. He had to be erased. Among the Norse, identity was not something individual. It was woven into bloodlines, inherited through clan and kinship. A man's worth came from both his actions and the honor of his lineage. To be labeled aggr threatened to sever that chain completely. It wasn't just disgrace, it was disconnection. For those tainted by ergi, whether through accusation or confirmed outlawry, death was only the beginning. The true punishment came later, in silence. Unlike fallen warriors who lived on through sagas and stones, the Nidingur, the dishonored man, was never named again. He wasn't forgotten by time. He was erased by choice. In Viking tradition, to remember was to preserve. Families took pride in their ancestry, tracing heroic bloodlines back for generations. But when a man had been accused of unmanly conduct, especially if he failed to defend himself, his name would vanish from genealogies. Not by oversight, but by design. Icelandic family records and sagas often skipped over or cut short the lines of such men. This wasn't merely shame. It was survival. To be descended from someone dishonored by NID was to inherit a stain. It could ruin marriage prospects, forfeit land rights, and lower one's status at the thing, the Norse assembly. To protect future generations, families would disown the disgraced. Over time, they would speak of him less, then not at all. Eventually, they would deny he had ever existed. In Viking society, to be found unmanly was to risk more than exile or death. It was to be erased from history, to become a ghost in your own bloodline. A man who once swore oaths and stood in battle could end up nameless, unmourned, unspoken. The Norse weren't just punishing individuals, they were preserving a rigid vision of manhood through exile, outlawry, and oblivion. That same impulse to guard honor by casting out the unworthy still echoes in modern systems, where gender, justice, and memory continue to intertwine. What aspects of our world reflect that same ancient fear of unmanliness? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And remember the words of the Havamal: cattle die, kinsmen die, and so must one die oneself. But a noble name will never die, if good renown one gets.